Hi everyone, it's Kristen. So today we're talking about this X-Men 9, the third part of the Raid on Graymalkin series. I got this Wednesday before we got our, inclement weather, our snow, which has all melted already. So sad, but it's Texas. I'm not surprised. Snow, even if we get any, which I was happy to get some. I was great. Like I spent most of yesterday, just, in Thursday because everything was closed. So I didn't have to go to work. So I spent most of the day just holed up with Dazzler watching Christmas movies that I didn't have time to watch over Christmas. So that was nice. Um, and it was nice to see the snow falling and play in the snow. It was great. I mean, I know a lot of you probably get snow all the time or don't like snow, but I was happy just to have this little bit of snow. So there were some surprises in here. Some, you're like, okay, I kind of knew that was going to happen. But, okay, so we see Nightcrawler and Psylocke, separated from the group. They're in the Morlock tunnels, which is, former Morlock tunnels, which is the sub-basement of the mansion. And Psylocke is like, yield Nightcrawler because, unlike you who play with swords, I use them to kill. I'm like, whoa, okay. Ouch. But of course, Nightcrawler, he's said recently in the Uncanny series, he's realized he's not a killer. So I'm sure he's okay with, you know, that. So we see the warden and Scurvy, her pet mutant, and the head of security in there, and they're talking about how now there's, X-Men in the building. And she's like, well, we want them to be here. This is where they belong. And Scurvy says, hey, I can't continue to um, control the trustees, Siren, Blob, Wild Child, etc., while messing with the X-Men's emotions. Because Nightcrawler right here said, have you noticed that since we are separated from the rest of the group, like, I don't feel like I want to kill you anymore? So, and the Warrens and the head of security is like, I just don't think we're equipped to deal with this. And with the Warden's like, they're just X-Men or they're just mutants. And he says, no, they're not just mutants, they're X-Men, which big splash page, which these used to be like huge, I feel like in the 90s. Like there was always a splash page in almost not every issue, but a lot of issues, which they're fun. Don't get me wrong, and they're dramatic and dynamic. So I'm all for it. So Cyclops and Rogue, are kind of barking out orders. And it's interesting, like down here we see Magic actually using magic. She says Winds of Watum, which, because, of course ever since she was made, kind of magic, in Uncanny X-Men 160, all the way back, um, she, of course, has her soul sword, but she doesn't really she doesn't use magic magic spells and stuff. So it's interesting that Marvel and she have embraced that side of her more recently. So Temper makes a dig at Jubilee. She's like, what does she call her? Oh yeah, one of Wolverine's special girl sidekicks. And Jubilee's like, well, damn, ouch. um, so Wolverine and Wildchild are fighting. Blob and Juggernaut are fighting, and this was funny. Okay. Oh, so Death Dream is like, I love watching you work. It's really a pleasure to watch you work. You're horrible. And Magic's like, you haven't seen anything yet. And so Juggernaut, Cyclops is like, hey, Magic, help Juggernaut out, take down the Blob. And Juggernaut's like, no, I'm fine. I have him. I have him. And so Magic helps, and he's like, oh, I had him. And she's like, yeah, sure you did. And he's like, "Ugh, I did. I had him, Wind Stealer." And okay, so that makes me think of in Lord of the Rings when Gimli and Legolas are having that, um contest to see who can take down the most enemies. And Legolas takes down that whole elephant full of enemies, and Gimli's like shouts, "That only counts as one." I love that moment. Like best line moment in the whole series for me. That's what it makes me think of. So, um, Ransom, I almost called him Grifter because that's what he reminds me of. Like from from Wildcats, that's who he reminds me of. He saves Temper from one of the Wolfpack Sentinels, and so they're comparing notes. Like, okay, well, those wild pack sentinels are new, and he's like, yep. And she's like, what now, Slim? Which I think it's funny that she calls him Slim because he doesn't he remarked earlier in the series he doesn't really like that name. Doesn't really like being called that. So we go back to the warden and the head of security and Scurvy. They're talking, and basically just how there's 16 X-Men now. Like, how are they supposed to deal with 16 X-Men? And she's like, this is a prison. This is where they're supposed to be. And she's like, because head of security is like, I don't, again, he's like, we're not equipped to deal with this. And she says to her pet mutant Scurvy, enact white light protocol. And he's like, we can't. I don't know what that is. We'll find out. And this was interesting. You claim to be a psychic to rival Charles Xavier. Prove it to me. That's what the warden says. And I'm like thinking, okay, if he's that powerful, how did we not know about him for all this time? Or did he pop up in another story and I just totally kind of forgot about him? Because honestly, okay, well, there's like so many years of X-Men lore, and of course I've read I would say all of it. I want to say all of it. Probably there's like a couple annuals or miniseries, whatever, that I've missed, but I don't really remember him. But of course, sometimes it's hard to remember everything that's happened in X-Men. So I forget sometimes and I have to, go back and I'm like, oh yeah. So have we seen him before this story? Like, I don't remember him. But of course, like Cassandra Nova, existed for all those years and we didn't know about her, and then she popped up. So it's the whole, like, whatever the writers you know think, believe, whatever. um so I guess I shouldn't be surprised. So they're down in the tunnels and there's this door, and Psylocke is acting kind of weird and creepy, and she's like, there's this door that needs a key, and luckily, Nightcrawler, you brought me the key. And he's like, what are you talking about? And it looks kind of like similar to the Inmate X, kind of door, but it doesn't say on it Inmate X, so it's different. And plus they're kind of in front of the teams are in front of Inmate X, trying to arguing like, hey, we should let him out. Rogue's like, okay, we need to free Charles. And Cyclops is like, no. And Rogue is like, what do you mean no? And he's like, no, I'm not going to, under no circumstances, will allow Charles Xavier to be freed. And she's like, you want to leave him here in this place? And he's like, yeah, because we're free. Don't you And then he goes into his speech about how, don't you see, like, we've always been like a slave to Xavier's dream. He's always manipulated us because of his dream, and what has that gotten us? Nothing. Now we're free of him, free of his dreams. We're free to find our own dreams and follow our own path because he's in there and we're out here. You let Charles Xavier back into the world and we're back on his leash. And she's like, but this is wrong. We can't do that. We can't just leave him in here. And then Cyclops brings up a moment from the, Fall of X, that Xavier made him watch as he killed the civilian crew of the spaceship Agnew, which of course we later learned. And this, of course, with like all comic book stories and X-Men and stuff, it's complicated. So Xavier killed, what he actually did is, he was working with Orcus on the inside as like a double agent to try to save, everybody. And when they saw him kill the crew of the Agnew, he didn't really kill the crew. He killed clones of the crew, which I'm like, okay, that's like a gray area, I feel like. Isn't that still killing though? Isn't that still murder, even though they're clones? I mean, obviously, none of the X-Men are perfect. Never have been, never will be. And I can understand why, okay, I can understand why Scott is disillusioned with Xavier. First of all, for years, Xavier's dream was like, let's exist in peaceful harmony with humanity. Let's use our powers for the good of all mankind. And with Karakoa, it just, to me, that didn't feel like Xavier, didn't feel like the X-Men, because now all of a sudden they've cut themselves off from humanity almost, completely, and living on this island, you know, by themselves. And of course, I mean, they no longer really interact with humanity. It just didn't feel like the X-Men to me. I mean, it was still a super like interesting story and just, I mean, refreshing, I guess, in a way that it was just so like out there, but at the same time, it never really felt like the X-Men to me. It just seemed like a betrayal of Xavier's dream. So, anyway, I mean, I get how that all happened. They did a good job of telling that story for sure. But anyway, so I can understand why Cyclops is disillusioned with Xavier for sure. Um, we also, also makes me think of the time he killed Xavier in a, A versus X, because he and Xavier disagreed. Granted, he was under the influence of the Phoenix Force, but still. And of course, Xavier, well, no one in comic books stays dead for very long, so it was fine. But so anyway, but the X-Men don't know that he killed clones, but like I said, to me, that's still kind of a gray area because he still murdered all these people, even though they were just clones. I don't know. It's complicated. So Rogue is like, I am not leaving one of our own in prison. And Cyclops is like, okay, fine. You'll have to go through me then. You'll have, over my, basically, you'll have to kill me. And then he says, okay, or more accurately, have Wolverine kill me. And so Scurvy comes in and says, please, all you, tight-fitting costume, beautiful people, let me make one thing clear to you. None of you are leaving. Um, and, you know, Rogue and Cyclops, all the X-Men get together. They start, excuse me, sorry, barking out orders. And Scurvy's like, have you guys ever thought about or wondered like how one of the most powerful mutants, powerful psychics in the world could be, locked in prison? Have you ever thought about that? And then he says, White Light Protocol, which, like I said, I still don't really know what that means. Maybe it means because it's not what he did to the trustees by controlling them, because he hadn't done that before. And when the warden asked him to do it, he's like, we can't do that. So it must be something different entirely. Maybe like complete control of them, like erasing, who they are completely. I'm not sure. They don't really explain it very well. But I guess Kane, because he's not technically a mutant. He was able to resist it long enough to break away and try to free, because this, this door says inmate X, try to free who he thinks is Professor Xavier so that Professor Xavier can combat, scurvy. And what's interesting, oh, I missed the panel. I forgot about that. It's like way back here. I think I missed it. And I thought it was pretty funny. Anyway, so sorry, Death Dream says to Magic, I love watching you work. You're terrible. You're horrible. And Magic said, you haven't seen anything yet. So I missed that, but that happened earlier in the issue. But anyway, so Kane tries to free Xavier, and we hear this voice saying, "Thank you, Kane, but the effort is entirely unnecessary. Despite the name, I'm afraid inmate X does not apply to me. Does not refer to me." And there you go, Xavier. Like they tried to keep me locked down underground, but here I stand, resurrected from the ashes, as it were, which is what this whole era is called, from the ashes. So, and I don't know if it seems like he's done something to Psylocke and Nightcrawler because they don't look like themselves. They kind of look like, they're zombies of themselves. So I don't understand. So, a few things about that. Like, surprised me. Okay, I really thought, and I think everyone did, that Inmate X referred to Xavier. But obviously it doesn't. So I'm trying to think, okay, who could that refer to? The only one I can come up with is like X-Men, because he's super powerful and they would definitely need to, stash him away. Yeah. So who do you guys think Inmate X is? Obviously I haven't read the fourth part, so don't spoil it for me. But or then maybe you shouldn't say, because obviously you'll be biased if you've already read it to say, hey, this is who it is, or this is who I think it is. Anyway, so like I said, I don't know who it is. Interesting. So obviously Xavier was behind that other door that Psylocke and Nightcrawler were behind, and Psylocke got all weird saying, this needs a key. So obviously they freed him somehow, or he reached out to them and used them to free himself. I don't know. But like I said, the unsurprising thing was they didn't actually, I mean, they did fight the two teams, but they didn't like get into such a fight that, there were serious consequences to the fight. Um, Now that Xavier's out, that's what the whole um multi-issue crossover about, the hunt for Xavier, which is something they did in like the late 90s, that storyline. So it's interesting that they kind of not revisit it, but kind of in a way revisit it. So anyway, yeah. So I really wish I already had my copy so I could find out what happens. Um, yeah, I really want to know who Inmate X is. I want to know how Xavier got out. I want to know, like, if I'm assuming they defeat Scurvy at this point since, you know, Xavier's out, but we will see. Hopefully I get that issue soon because yeah, I want to know how it ends. I want to know what happens. So, anyway, join me next time for, and I think actually yeah, I'm going to talk about Storm 3 since it guest stars, the X-Men, Uncanny X-Men, the team in Louisiana. So, join me for that later. So, until then, bye.